I am Julian, 28 years old. 2 weeks ago, my own father sent a team of armed men to hunt me down in the middle of the night over a multi-million-dollar family inheritance. While I was standing in the pouring rain, clutching a stack of forged documents that could send me to federal prison for the rest of my life, my mother looked me dead in the eye and said, "Just give your father the papers, Julian. It's for the good of the family." She smiled at me, a warm, maternal smile, right as she handed me over to the wolves. But there is one thing they didn't know. They thought I was just the quiet, invisible disappointment of the family. They didn't know my grandfather had left me a secret weapon, a single piece of paper that gave me the power to dismantle their entire fake empire brick by brick. And right now, the people who spent my entire life treating me like garbage are the ones begging for my mercy. Before I tell you exactly how I brought my golden child brother and my ruthless parents to their knees, hit that like button if you believe that karma always collects its debts. And please, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. It helps me realize I am not alone in this. Now let's go back to where this nightmare truly began. The rain was coming down in sheets, heavy and freezing, washing over the rusted tracks of an abandoned train depot on the edge of Denver. I stood there shivering, the icy water soaking completely through my heavy canvas jacket, gripping a weathered leather folder so tightly my knuckles had turned completely white. My chest heaved with every breath, the cold air burning my lungs. Inside that folder was my entire life, or rather, a version of my life that had been entirely fabricated by the man whose last name I share. My father, Richard Crawford. You see, I grew up as the background character in my own family. If my family was a cinematic production, my brother Preston was the blockbuster star, and I was the extra sweeping the floor in the background. Preston was the golden child. He always had everything. An Ivy League scholarship fully paid for by my parents' massive college fund, a brand new Porsche handed to him with a giant red bow when he turned 17, and by the time he was 21, a guaranteed executive position in our father's sprawling real estate holding company. Preston was the story my parents always wanted to tell at their lavish Thanksgiving dinners, country club galas, and charity auctions. He had the perfect, chiseled jawline, the custom-tailored Italian suits, and the arrogant, practiced smirk of a guy who knew the world was handed to him on a silver platter. Every promotion he ever received was a hollow title designed to stroke his ego. Every achievement was bought and paid for by my father's endless checkbook. And then there was me, Julian, the spare, the afterthought. I went to a local state college, paying my own way by working grueling night shifts at a logistics warehouse, and drove a beat-up used Honda that rattled violently every time I hit the highway. I wore clothes I bought off the clearance rack. I ate instant noodles while Preston dined on Wagyu beef at corporate retreats. But I didn't mind the hard work. In fact, I preferred it. The physical exhaustion kept me grounded. It kept me far away from the suffocating, toxic pressure of my father's expectations. Richard was a man who measured human worth strictly by net worth, social leverage, and absolute obedience. If you weren't useful to his grand vision, you simply did not exist. And to him, I was entirely useless. I was quiet, observant, and fiercely independent, 3 traits he absolutely despised. My mother, Margaret, was his silent partner in this psychological warfare. She wore expensive pearls, hosted high-society charity events, and always knew exactly how to look the other way when my father was being unspeakably cruel. She was the master of the subtle insult, the kind of woman who could tear down your self-esteem with a single, disappointed sigh while pouring you a cup of tea. I played along for years. That is exactly what you do when you are the son who just wants peace. You swallow your pride, you sit quietly at the far end of the long mahogany dinner table, and you let your brother take the blinding spotlight. I was never supposed to do better than Preston. Not financially, not emotionally, not in any conceivable capacity. I was meant to be the cautionary tale, the baseline of mediocrity that made Preston's fabricated success look even more brilliant. Yet, somehow, against all their careful conditioning, I did better. Quietly, far away from their toxic shadow, I built a life that was entirely mine. I got my real estate license, saved every single penny I earned from my commissions, and started investing. Nothing flashy. No multimillion-dollar commercial high-rises or luxury condos. Just small, sensible residential properties in working-class neighborhoods. By the time I was 28, I had built a highly respectable cash-flowing portfolio. I had tenants who respected me, a bank account that I built from absolute zero, and a deep, abiding sense of self-worth. It was mine, clean, honest, and earned with my own blood and sweat. For the first time in my entire life, I felt truly safe. I felt proud of the man I saw in the mirror. I actually believed I had successfully escaped their orbit. I thought I could just be the distant, polite son who shows up on major holidays, eats a slice of dry turkey, avoids the inevitable family arguments about someone's messy divorce or a neighbor's bitter custody battle, and leaves early. But a toxic family has a funny way of dragging you back into the mud just when you finally feel clean. It was a beautiful, crisp Sunday afternoon. Exactly 2 weeks ago, I was standing on the pristine, hand-laid brick porch of my parents' massive estate, holding a bottle of cheap wine I bought from Walmart because I knew they wouldn't drink it anyway. The sun was shining. The air was cool. I took a deep, steadying breath, pasting on my usual neutral, unbothered expression. I didn't know it yet, but the moment I reached out and turned that heavy brass doorknob, I was stepping blindly into a lethal trap that had been set for me 22 years ago. I genuinely thought the absolute worst thing that could happen that day was enduring Preston's usual bragging about his latest massive salary bump. I was so incredibly wrong. The sprawling backyard of my parents' estate looked like a high-end commercial for early retirement. It featured the kind of perfectly manicured, emerald green lawn that probably cost more to maintain in a single month than I made in an entire year. The air was thick and heavy, smelling of expensive mesquite charcoal, prime grilled ribeyes, and Richard's overpowering, suffocating cologne. Neighbors from their exclusive HOA were mingling around the massive kidney-shaped pool, holding crystal glasses filled with top-shelf bourbon, laughing obnoxiously at jokes that simply weren't funny. I immediately found a quiet, shaded spot near the edge of the stone patio, doing my absolute best to blend in with the large potted ferns. I ended up talking to an older neighbor, a retired orthodontist named Tom, about federal interest rates, property taxes, and the current housing market. It was harmless, mundane small talk. Just two guys holding flimsy paper plates loaded with potato salad, chewing the fat to pass the time. Tom took a sip of his beer, looking at my faded polo shirt. He asked me how my work was going, assuming I was still struggling to make ends meet. Without thinking, without running it through my usual filter of self-censorship, the truth just slipped out. "It's going really well, actually," I said casually, taking a bite of my food. "I just closed on my third rental property in downtown Denver last Thursday. It's a small duplex, needs some work, but the yield is going to be incredibly solid. I swear on my life I did not mean it as a flex. It was just a simple, objective fact." But I didn't realize Preston was standing right behind me, pouring himself a massive glass of scotch at the outdoor bar cart. I heard the ice stop clinking against the crystal. The silence behind me was sudden and sharp. I turned around. Preston was frozen in place. His perfect, magazine cover smile had vanished entirely, replaced by a look of absolute, unadulterated disgust. The silence that fell between us felt heavy, thick with decades of unspoken resentment and fierce competition. "Your third property?" Preston said, his voice loud enough, sharp enough, to make several heads turn in our direction. "What the hell are you talking about, Julian? You don't have the capital to buy a third property." "I saved up," I said quietly, instantly regretting ever opening my mouth. I tried to de-escalate. "It's just a small duplex, Preston. Nothing crazy. Nothing like what the company handles." Preston's face flushed a deep, angry red. He hated being blindsided. He absolutely loathed the idea that I had achieved something, anything, without his permission or my father's financial backing. "You saved up?" he mocked loudly, stepping closer, invading my personal space. "From what? Your pathetic little commission checks? Give me a break. Don't insult my intelligence, Julian. You probably cheated your way into a subprime loan, Or maybe you're running some kind of pathetic scam on your clients. Preston, stop, I said, keeping my voice low and steady. People were openly staring now. The ambient chatter of the party had died down. My mother, Margaret, gasped in dramatic horror and rushed over, her heels clicking rapidly against the stone. She immediately placed her perfectly manicured hand on Preston's arm, treating him like he was the one being viciously attacked. Julian, please. There is absolutely no need to make your brother feel small. My mother whispered furiously, glaring at me with eyes full of venom. Make him feel small? He was the one with the multimillion-dollar trust fund, the corner office, and the Porsche. I had just bought a rundown duplex with peeling paint. Before I could even formulate a response to her absurd accusation, Preston completely lost his mind. He threw his heavy crystal glass straight across the yard. It soared through the air and shattered violently against the stone patio, sending jagged shards of glass and expensive scotch flying everywhere. A woman screamed. The entire party went completely, terrifyingly dead silent. Even the massive grill seemed to stop sizzling. My father marched over from the other side of the yard, his face dark with fury, ready to publicly scold me and demand I apologize for upsetting his golden boy. But before Richard could utter a single word, a raspy, booming, deeply commanding voice cut through the thick, suffocating air. You should be very careful throwing tantrums about money that isn't yours, Preston. Everyone turned simultaneously. It was my grandfather, Harrison Crawford. He was sitting in a padded lawn chair in the far corner, a plate of untouched ribs resting on his lap. My grandfather rarely spoke at these ostentatious gatherings. He was the brilliant founder of the original company, the ruthless, hard-working man who built the massive wealth my father now endlessly flaunted. He was sharp as a tack, highly intimidating, and usually kept to himself, watching everyone with calculating eyes. Preston looked physically sick. He swallowed hard. What are you talking about, Grandpa? My grandfather didn't answer Preston. He didn't even look at him. Instead, his piercing, icy gray eyes locked directly onto mine. It was a look of deep, profound sorrow, mixed with something I couldn't quite identify at the time. Fear, maybe? Regret? Ask your father, Grandpa Harrison said softly, never breaking eye contact with me for a second. Then, he simply picked up his knife and went back to cutting his meat as if he hadn't just thrown a live, ticking grenade into the middle of a high-society family barbecue. I turned slowly to my father. Richard's face had drained of all color. He looked like he was going to be physically sick right there on the grass. He actively avoided my eyes, instantly pivoting to his corporate crisis management mode. All right, everyone, the show is over. Preston is just incredibly stressed about a major upcoming acquisition at work. Let's get back to the food. The steaks are getting cold. Nobody bought the lie. The tension in the air was thick enough to choke on. Preston stormed inside the house, slamming the heavy glass sliding door so hard the metal frame rattled violently. My mother chased right after him, doting on him, soothing his bruised ego. I stood there, rooted to the spot, feeling the immense weight of my grandfather's cryptic words sinking deep into my bones. Money that isn't yours. What exactly did that mean? I left the party immediately. I couldn't stand the way my parents were looking at me. It wasn't their usual look of disdain or annoyance. It was genuine, unfiltered panic. They looked at me like I was a bomb they didn't know how to defuse. The next morning, at exactly 7 a.m., my cell phone rang. The caller ID showed my grandfather's private number. I answered. His voice sounded rough, exhausted, like he hadn't slept in days. Julian, come to my house right now. Alone. Make absolutely sure you aren't followed. My blood ran cold. Followed? Why on earth would I be followed? I was a small-time real estate agent. I jumped into my Honda and drove across town to his massive, old-money estate hidden behind tall iron gates. When I arrived, he was sitting alone on the expansive front porch, a heavy, antique wooden box resting carefully on his lap. The brass hinges were rusted, the dark wood worn smooth by decades of time. He didn't invite me inside. He didn't offer me coffee. He just held out his trembling hands and handed me the box. "Whatever happens next, Julian, do not blame yourself," he whispered, his breathing shallow and labored. "Your father made a terrible choice a very long time ago. A choice Preston was never supposed to find out about. And a burden you were never, ever supposed to carry." "Grandpa, what is this?" I asked, looking down at the heavy box in my hands. "It's yours now. It has always been yours. Your father will deny it if you ask him. He will lie to your face. But the absolute proof is in there." He paused, taking a ragged, painful breath, clutching his chest slightly. "If things go wrong, Julian, don't try to be a hero. Just leave. Disappear." I drove back to my modest apartment with the wooden box sitting in my passenger seat like a highly radioactive core. I locked my deadbolt, pulled down the cheap plastic blinds, and used a screwdriver to pry the rusted latch open. Inside the box was a thick, yellowed legal folder. Printed across the top in bold, black letters were the words, "Irrevocable trust and asset transfer." I sat on my faded couch and started flipping through the dense pages, my eyes scanning the complicated legal jargon. And then, my heart completely stopped. I saw it. My name, Julian Thomas Crawford. I was listed as the sole primary beneficiary and the absolute legal owner of a massive trust holding. I looked at the notarized date at the bottom of the page. I was exactly 6 years old when this document was signed and filed. I kept reading, my hands shaking violently. It wasn't just a college fund. It wasn't a small savings account meant to buy my first house. According to these binding legal documents, my grandfather hadn't given the main controlling stake of his company to my father. He hadn't left it for Preston, the golden child, to inherit. He had left it entirely to me. On paper, legally and bindingly, I owned exactly 50% of Crawford Holdings. My head was spinning so fast I felt nauseous. This made absolutely no sense. Why would I be the owner? Why did I grow up wearing Preston's faded hand-me-downs while he drove a Porsche? Why did my father treat me like a worthless burden, a parasite on his wealth, if I was technically the one holding the keys to his entire corporate empire? That night, at exactly 2 a.m., a violent, deafening pounding on my apartment door snapped me out of my spiraling thoughts. I jumped off the couch. I looked through the peephole. It was Preston. He looked completely deranged. His perfectly styled hair was a wild mess. His eyes were bloodshot and wide, and he was hammering his fists against the cheap wood of my door like he wanted to break it down. I opened the door, leaving the heavy brass chain engaged. "Preston, what the hell are you doing here? It's the middle of the night. You had to ruin everything, didn't you?" he screamed, his voice cracking with pure hysteria. "You always wanted to take what was mine. You pathetic, invisible loser." "I don't even know what you're talking about," I lied smoothly, my heart hammering violently against my ribs. "Grandpa told me," Preston yelled, pressing his sweaty face against the narrow crack in the door. "He told me the truth tonight. Half of my inheritance, my company, is sitting in a massive trust under your name. He was supposed to change it back. He promised Dad he was supposed to fix it before he died. Before he died." The words hit me like a physical blow to the stomach. Grandpa Harrison wasn't dead. I had just seen him that morning. He was fine. Old, frail, but completely fine. "What do you mean, before he died?" I demanded, my voice dropping to a harsh, dangerous whisper. Preston's eyes widened slightly, the alcohol and rage suddenly clearing just enough for him to realize exactly what he had just slipped and said. He took a staggering step back. The furious energy suddenly drained out of him, replaced by a cold, terrified mask. He didn't say another word. He just turned around and sprinted down the dark apartment hallway, leaving me staring into the empty, silent space. A terrible, icy dread pooled deep in my stomach. I grabbed my phone from the counter and desperately dialed my grandfather's private number. It went straight to voicemail. I called again. Voicemail. I paced the floor, dialing a third time. Nothing. I thought the worst was over. I thought this was just a bitter family argument about money and pride. I was so incredibly wrong. I didn't even bother grabbing a jacket. I ran down the 3 flights of stairs, jumped into my freezing Honda, and sped recklessly across town toward my grandfather's secluded estate. The streets were completely dead, illuminated only by the flickering amber glow of passing streetlights. Every red light felt like an excruciating eternity. I gripped the steering wheel until my hands cramped. Preston's exact words kept looping in my head on an endless, terrifying track. Before he died. Before he died. When I finally pulled up to the heavy, wrought iron gates of the estate, my stomach dropped. The gates were wide open. Grandpa Harrison never, ever left the security gates open at night. I drove slowly up the winding gravel driveway, the tires crunching loudly in the dead silent night. The massive brick house was completely dark, except for a faint, flickering bluish glow coming from the study window on the ground floor. I parked the car on the grass and ran up the steps to the front porch. The heavy, solid oak front door was slightly ajar. I pushed it open, stepping cautiously into the grand foyer. The air inside felt stagnant, heavy with the familiar smell of old leather books, pipe tobacco, and something else. Something sharp, bitter, and metallic. "Grandpa," I called out. My voice echoed hollowly off the high, vaulted ceilings. Nothing. I walked slowly down the long hallway toward the study, my heart pounding so hard I could hear the blood rushing in my ears. The blue glow was coming from his large television, muted, playing a late-night financial news channel. And there, sitting in his favorite worn leather armchair, was Grandpa Harrison. His head was tilted sharply back, his pale eyes half open, staring blankly at the ornate ceiling. One hand was resting flat against his chest, clutching his shirt, the other hanging limply over the wooden armrest. On the small mahogany side table next to him was a crystal glass, half empty with his favorite expensive scotch. I rushed over, dropping hard to my knees beside the chair. "Grandpa! Grandpa! Wake up!" I reached out and shook his shoulder. His skin was cold. Too cold. The terrifying kind of cold that tells your brain immediately that the person you are touching is no longer a person, just a vessel that has been emptied. I stumbled backward, gasping for air, hitting my back against a bookshelf. My grandfather was dead. The only man in this entire toxic family who had ever looked at me with a single ounce of genuine respect was gone. I pulled out my phone with violently trembling hands and dialed 911, my voice cracking as I gave the dispatcher the address. When the paramedics and police arrived, they were clinical, detached, and fast. They checked his vitals, shook their heads in routine resignation, and muttered something to each other about a massive cardiac event. A heart attack. A tragic but incredibly common end for a man his age with a history of high blood pressure. But as the paramedics were zipping him into the thick black body bag, I noticed something hidden under the heavy brass base of the desk lamp next to his chair. It was a small, sealed white envelope with my name scrawled on it in his distinctly shaky handwriting. I checked to make sure the police officers were distracted, and I quietly slipped the envelope into my back pocket. I sat alone on the cold front steps of the estate, watching the coroner's van pull away into the darkness. The flashing red lights painted the surrounding oak trees in violent, rhythmic strokes. I pulled the envelope from my pocket and tore it open. Inside was a single piece of thick stationery paper. "Julian, if you are reading this, it means Richard found out I gave you the box today. I am so deeply sorry, my boy. I tried to fix this quietly, to protect you, but your father is in entirely too deep. Do not confront him. Do not try to fix this. If he finds out you know the truth about the company, leave immediately. Run. Do not trust anyone." My father. My grandfather wasn't warning me about Preston's petty jealousy. He was warning me about my own father, Richard. 2 hours later, as the sky was just beginning to turn a bruised, pale purple with the approaching dawn, my phone vibrated in my pocket. It was an unknown number. I answered it, my throat dry and my voice raspy. "Julian Crawford?" A deep, authoritative voice asked. "This is Detective Reyes with the Denver Police Department. I need you to come down to Denver General Hospital immediately." "What happened?" I asked, gripping the steering wheel of my parked car. "It's about your brother, Preston. He was involved in a severe single-vehicle accident about an hour ago. He crashed his Porsche into a steep ravine off Highway 9. He's in emergency surgery." I felt the entire world tilt on its axis. My grandfather dies in his chair, and hours later my brother crashes his sports car off a cliff. This was not a coincidence. This was a purge. When I arrived at the hospital, the harsh, sterile smell of bleach and antiseptic hit me instantly. I walked quickly into the intensive care waiting room. My mother, Margaret, was sitting hunched over on a cheap plastic chair, her face buried in her hands, weeping loudly and dramatically. My father, Richard, was standing near the large window, talking in hushed, incredibly aggressive tones to Detective Reyes. When Richard turned and saw me standing there, his eyes narrowed into dark, hateful slits. He marched straight over to me, completely ignoring the detective. "Where the hell were you?" Richard hissed, grabbing my upper arm so hard his fingers dug painfully into my muscle. "I was at Grandpa's," I said, violently yanking my arm away from his grip. "He's dead, Dad. Massive heart attack." Richard didn't even flinch. There was absolutely no shock on his face. No grief, no sorrow, just cold, calculating machinery working behind his eyes. "I know," he said flatly. "And then your brother gets into a catastrophic accident right after leaving your apartment in the middle of the night. What did you say to him, Julian? Did you provoke him? Was he driving reckless because he was running from you?" I stared at the man who had raised me. He was actively trying to frame the narrative right in front of the police. He was trying to pin Preston's near-fatal accident entirely on me to deflect attention. "I didn't do anything," I said coldly, my voice ringing out in the quiet waiting room. "He came to my place screaming like a lunatic about an inheritance." Richard's jaw locked so tight I thought his teeth would shatter. Detective Reyes stepped forward, his small notebook out, clicking his pen. "Mr. Crawford," the detective said, looking directly at me, "your father mentioned there was a heated dispute over a family trust tonight. Is it true your brother was highly agitated when he left your residence?" "He was," I admitted, choosing my words very carefully, knowing Richard was hanging on every syllable. "But I have no idea why he drove his car off a cliff." I looked straight into Richard's eyes, not blinking. "Maybe someone cut his brakes." Richard's eyes flashed with pure, unfiltered murder. Before he could speak, a surgeon in green scrubs walked through the heavy double doors. "Family of Preston Crawford?" My mother shot up, her heels clacking. "Is my baby okay? Is he alive?" "He's stabilized," the surgeon said, wiping sweat from his forehead with his sleeve. "He has a severe concussion, 3 broken ribs, and a highly complex fractured femur. He is awake, but extremely disoriented and in a lot of pain. However, he is asking to see someone." "I'll go," my mother cried, rushing forward to the doors. "Actually," the surgeon checked his clipboard, looking slightly confused. "He specifically asked for Julian." Richard immediately stepped in front of me, using his body to block my path. "That's completely ridiculous. He wants his parents. He's confused. Let the kid through." "Richard," Detective Reyes said firmly, his sharp eyes analyzing the incredibly toxic, strange dynamic between us. I pushed past my father's shoulder and followed the nurse down the glaringly bright, white hallway. When I walked into Preston's room, I barely recognized him. The golden child, the untouchable prince of the family, was broken. His face was deeply bruised and swollen, for tubes running out of both arms, his perfect, expensive haircut matted with dried, dark blood. I stood at the foot of his hospital bed, fully expecting him to start yelling at me again, to blame me for his crash. Instead, Preston looked up at me with an expression I had never, ever seen on his arrogant face before. Absolute primal terror. "Julian," he rasped, his voice incredibly weak and trembling. "Close the damn door." I pushed the heavy wooden door shut, sealing us in. "What happened, Preston?" Did you crash because you were driving drunk? I didn't crash, Preston choked out, thick tears pooling in his bloodshot eyes and tracking down his bruised cheeks. Someone ran me off the road, a massive black SUV with tinted windows. They rammed my rear bumper repeatedly until I lost control and went over the guardrail. Who? I asked, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Preston swallowed hard, wincing as the movement pulled at his broken ribs. Dad's people. I swear to God, Julian, it was Dad's people. I stared at him, my mind struggling to process the sheer insanity of his claim. Why would Dad try to kill his favorite son? Because I figured it out tonight, Preston cried, his entire facade of superiority completely shattering. The trust fund, Julian. The company. The promotions. It's all a massive, elaborate lie. Crawford Holdings is hollow. It's been practically bankrupt for over a decade. I gripped the metal railing of his bed, leaning in. What are you talking about? Dad is worth tens of millions of dollars. He just bought a yacht. No, he's not. Preston hissed frantically, his monitors beeping faster. Dad made terrible, highly leveraged investments years ago. He lost everything. To keep the country club lifestyle going, to keep up appearances, he started borrowing money from the wrong people. Shady private equity firms. Cartel fronts. To pay them back, he started laundering their dirty money through our real estate development projects. Okay, I said, trying to breathe, trying to process this massive, world-altering revelation. But what does that have to do with the trust Grandpa gave me? Why am I listed as the owner on paper? Preston looked at me, a profound, sickening pity mixing with his terror. Because, Julian, you aren't the heir. You're the fall guy. The room spun. The fluorescent lights buzzed loudly in my ears. Dad put the main holding company in your name when you were a kid, Preston continued, his voice dropping to a harsh, desperate whisper. He set it up so that all the illegal money, every single dirty transaction, flows through offshore shell corporations that are legally tied to your social security number. If the FBI ever raids Crawford Holdings, or if the ruthless people he owes money to come collecting, all the legal liability, all the forged signatures point directly and exclusively to you. You're the legal meat shield, Julian. That's why he never wanted you involved in the family business. That's why he pushed you away. He needed you clean, completely distant, and blissfully oblivious so he could use you. Felt like the concrete floor had just dropped out from under me. All those years, the painful neglect, the harsh treatment, the way they kept me at arm's length while showering Preston with love. It wasn't because I was a disappointment. It wasn't because I wasn't smart enough or handsome enough. It was a highly calculated, cold-blooded legal strategy. My own parents groomed me from the age of 6 to go to federal prison so they could live in luxury and avoid the consequences of their own crimes. Grandpa found out, Preston gasped, coughing up a small bit of blood onto his chin. Grandpa found out what Dad was doing to you last week. He was going to expose him. He was going to transfer everything out of your name, shut down the accounts, and burn Dad to the ground to save you. That's why Grandpa is dead tonight, Julian. Dad killed him. And when I confronted Dad tonight and told him I knew the truth about the laundering, he sent that SUV after me to silence me. Couldn't breathe. My own father. My own blood. A murderer and a coward. Julian, listen to me, Preston begged, reaching out and grabbing my wrist with weak, trembling, bruised fingers. Dad knows Grandpa gave you the wooden box. He knows you have the original trust documents. Those papers are the only absolute proof that he orchestrated this entire setup. He will not let you leave this hospital alive with them. You have to run. Now, before he comes in here. I looked down at my brother, the brother I had bitterly resented my entire life. We were both just disposable pawns on Richard's sociopathic chessboard. But Preston was absolutely right. I was holding the smoking gun. I'll come back for you, I whispered. Just go, Preston hissed, letting go of my arm. I backed out of the room, my mind racing at 1,000,000 miles an hour. I stepped out into the hallway. Richard and Margaret were at the far end near the nurse's station. still intensely talking to Detective Reyes. I didn't hesitate for a microsecond. I turned quickly down the opposite corridor, hit the heavy metal door of the emergency stairwell, and sprinted down 4 flights of concrete stairs. I burst out into the freezing, dark night air, got into my Honda, locked the doors, and floored the accelerator. I thought I knew how deep the family betrayal went. I was so incredibly wrong. I drove aimlessly through the desolate city streets for over an hour, constantly checking my rearview mirror for black SUVs or trailing headlights. My mind was a chaotic, violent storm of intense grief, blistering rage, and utter disbelief. My father was a money launderer. My grandfather was murdered, and I was the designated legal scapegoat holding the bag for tens of millions of dollars in federal crimes. If I went to the police right now, what would I possibly tell them? That my dead grandfather gave me a wooden box? That my heavily medicated, hospitalized brother has a wild conspiracy theory about cartel money? I had the trust documents in my car, yes, but I needed hard, undeniable proof of the illegal transactions. I needed to see the forgery with my own 2 eyes to build a case that the FBI couldn't ignore. I remembered something Grandpa Harrison had said to me years ago, back when I was a teenager asking about the family business. If you ever need to find the real skeletons, Julian, don't look in the polished closets of the new high-rise. Look in the basement of the old Denver office. That's where the ink never dries. Crawford Holdings currently had a massive, sleek, glass-fronted headquarters downtown, but they still owned the original, run-down brick building on 4th Street, where my grandfather had started the business 40 years ago. It was supposedly just used for dead storage and archiving old tax returns. I parked 2 blocks away in a dark alley and walked through the shadows. The building looked completely abandoned, the large windows dark and heavily coated in years of grime. I used my everyday carry pocket knife to jimmy the old lock on the back service door and slipped silently inside. The air immediately smelled of heavy mildew, rotting paper, and damp earth. I turned on my phone's flashlight, keeping the beam low, and descended the creaky, wooden stairs into the massive basement archives. Row after row of rusted metal filing cabinets stood like forgotten tombstones in the dark. But there, in the far, isolated corner of the basement, a single desk lamp was turned on. I clicked off my flashlight instantly and crept closer, my heart pounding in my throat. Someone was sitting at a desk, rapidly shuffling papers. I quietly picked up a heavy, solid metal paperweight from a nearby sorting table, ready to swing if it was one of my father's men. I stepped quickly into the pool of light. An old man jumped violently out of his chair, dropping a massive stack of manila folders onto the concrete floor. He raised his frail hands defensively. "Don't shoot. I'm just doing my job. Please." I lowered the heavy paperweight, exhaling sharply. It was Wallace. He was the ancient, loyal archivist who had worked for my grandfather since the 1980s. I thought he had retired and moved away years ago. "Julian." Wallace squinted through his incredibly thick, wire-rimmed glasses, his chest heaving. "Good Lord, boy. You nearly gave me a fatal heart attack creeping up like that. Wallace, what on earth are you doing down here at 4 in the morning?" I demanded, not lowering my guard completely. Wallace looked down at the confidential folders scattered all over the floor, then looked back up at me with eyes full of deep, profound sorrow. "Your grandfather called me yesterday afternoon. He told me that if anything terrible happened to him, you would eventually come here looking for answers. He told me exactly what to show you." "Show me what?" I stepped closer. Wallace let out a heavy, rattling sigh. He walked slowly over to a bank of brand-new, reinforced steel filing cabinets equipped with digital combination locks. They looked completely out of place in the dusty, outdated basement. He punched in a 6-digit code, and the heavy drawer slid open smoothly. "Look for yourself, son," Wallace said quietly, stepping back. I stepped up to the drawer and pulled out the very first thick folder. The crisp label read, "Julian Crawford, Offshore Equity Transfers and Holdings." I opened it, my hands shaking. Inside were dozens of wire transfer authorizations, routing millions upon millions of dollars into obscure shell companies located in the Cayman Islands, Cyprus, and Panama. At the bottom of every single page executing the transfers was my signature. I frantically pulled another folder. Julian Crawford, Federal Defense Subcontracting. More contracts. More phantom companies billing for services that never existed. More of my perfectly forged signatures. He's been doing it for 10 solid years, Wallace whispered, standing in the shadows. Your father brings the digital files down here late at night, prints them out, and uses a highly advanced, mechanized autopen machine to perfectly replicate your exact signature on physical copies for the auditors and bank regulators. On paper, Julian, you are an international criminal mastermind orchestrating massive fraud. Your father is listed merely as a humble, third-party consultant. I felt hot, acidic bile rise in my throat. The sheer, terrifying volume of the fraud was staggering. Does anyone else know about this? I asked, my voice shaking with rage. What about Oliver? He's been my personal real estate attorney since I bought my first property. Wallace looked away, unable to meet my eyes. Who exactly do you think set up the LLCs for your father, Julian? Oliver has been on Richard's payroll since day one. He was purposely placed in your life, disguised as a friend, to monitor you, to make sure you never looked too closely at your own credit reports, to ensure you never filed your own taxes without his help. Oliver, the guy who drank cheap beers with me on my porch, the guy who came to my birthday dinners and helped me celebrate my small victories. He was a corporate spy planted by my own father. I need to take these, I said, grabbing massive handfuls of the folders and frantically stuffing them into my canvas backpack. This is the proof I need. If I take this to the FBI, they can run forensics and prove the signatures are autopen forgeries. You absolutely cannot go to the authorities yet, Wallace warned, stepping forward and grabbing my arm with surprising strength. The people your father owes this money to, Victor Thorne. He's a ruthless billionaire venture capitalist with deep, terrifying ties to organized crime syndicates. If Thorne finds out the FBI is looking into this money, he won't wait for a trial. He won't wait for lawyers. He will have you killed in a federal holding cell before you even make bail. You need to get out of Denver, Julian. Disappear entirely. I zipped up my heavy backpack, the physical weight of the forged documents pressing hard against my spine. Thank you, Wallace. You need to get out of here right now. Go stay with your daughter in Seattle. Don't tell anyone you saw me. I left the brick building, my mind crystal clear with adrenaline. I couldn't trust the local police. I couldn't trust my lawyer. I needed to go completely off the grid, analyze these documents, and figure out a foolproof way to detonate this bomb safely without getting myself killed in the process. There was only one place I could think to go. Grandpa Harrison's old hunting cabin up in the deep woods of Red Pine. It was incredibly isolated, located miles off the main paved roads, and the property was unregistered, paid for in cash decades ago. Not even Preston knew exactly where it was. I drove for 3 agonizing hours into the mountains, the heavy rain turning into a thick, freezing, blinding fog. I parked my car a full mile down the treacherous, washed-out logging road and hiked the rest of the way in the pitch dark, my boots slipping and sliding in the deep mud. The cabin was a small, rustic wooden structure, hidden deep in a dense grove of towering pines. I unlocked the heavy iron deadbolt with the key hidden under the rock, and stepped inside, exhausted, freezing cold, and terrified. I reached out and flipped the wall switch. The dim, yellow overhead bulb flickered weakly to life. And there, sitting perfectly upright at the small, wooden dining table holding a steaming ceramic mug of tea, was my mother, Margaret. I froze instantly, my hand instinctively dropping to the handle of the hunting knife clipped to my belt. "Hello, Julian," she said softly, her voice incredibly smooth and calming, like she was greeting me in her kitchen. She was wearing her expensive, pristine cashmere coat, looking completely, absurdly out of place in the dusty, spider-webbed cabin. "How the hell did you know I was here?" I demanded, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. My mother offered a sad, deeply empathetic smile. A mother always knows exactly where her son runs to when he's scared. And Oliver put a GPS tracker inside the bumper of your car 2 years ago just in case. Oliver. Of course. Every single aspect of my life was a monitored cage. You shouldn't be here, Mom, I said, taking a slow step back toward the open door. Dad is completely out of control. He tried to kill Preston tonight. He's actively framing me for massive federal crimes. Margaret sighed heavily, setting her mug down on the wooden table. She stood up, walking slowly toward me. Her eyes were suddenly filled with tears. She looked exactly like a desperate, loving mother trying to protect her child from a cruel world. I know, Julian, she whispered, her voice breaking perfectly on cue. I know absolutely everything. I just found out tonight. Your father has lost his mind. He's panicking because of the money he owes to Victor Thorne. He's not thinking straight, he's desperate. He murdered Grandpa, I yelled, the raw anger finally spilling over. Margaret flinched dramatically, a single tear rolling down her perfectly powdered cheek. I know, and it breaks my heart into pieces. But we can fix this, Julian. We can stop him from doing anything worse. How? I asked, my grip tightening on my backpack straps. Give me the documents, she said, her voice dropping to a gentle maternal, pleading tone. She reached out her soft hand. Give me the trust papers and the files you took from the Denver office. Let me take them to your father right now. If I hand them over, I can convince him to stop this madness. We can negotiate with Thorne together. We can keep this out of the courts, out of the press. I promise you on my life, Julian, I will protect you. I looked deep into my mother's eyes, the eyes of the woman who used to bandage my scraped knees, the woman who baked cookies on rainy Sundays. For a split second, the terrified, exhausted little boy inside me desperately wanted to hand over the heavy backpack, collapse into her arms, and let her fix everything. But then I remembered the barbecue. Julian, there's no need to make your brother feel small. I remembered the years of absolute silence, the way she always looked the other way, sipping her wine, when Richard was emotionally destroying me. I looked down at her pristine, expensive leather boots. They didn't have a single speck of mud on them. You didn't hike up here in the dark, I said quietly, my voice turning to absolute ice. The logging road is a mile long and pure, ankle-deep mud. Your boots are perfectly clean. Margaret's outstretched hand froze in midair. The warm, maternal tears instantly vanished from her eyes, drying up in a second, replaced by a cold, calculating emptiness that chilled me to the absolute bone. Julian, do not be difficult, she said, her tone suddenly flat, authoritative, and completely devoid of love. Just give me the damn bag. You drove an ATV up the back trail, I said, stepping backward toward the door. You didn't come here to save me. You came here to stall me until he arrived. My mother's lips pressed into a thin, furious, ugly line. You ungrateful, pathetic little brat. Your father gave you a life of ultimate privilege, a roof over your head. And this is how you repay us. By trying to tear down everything we built to protect our lifestyle? Give me the files. Now. You knew, I whispered, the final, fragile piece of my childhood shattering into dust on the floor. You knew he was using my name. You knew he killed Grandpa. It's about survival, Julian, Margaret snapped, the polite society mask completely gone, revealing the monster underneath. It's about legacy. You were never strong enough, never smart enough to carry this family, so you serve a different purpose. Now hand over the bag before you ruin everything for people who actually matter. Before I could say another word, the sound of heavy, aggressive tires crunching on the gravel outside echoed through the trees. Headlights, bright and blinding, swept across the dirty windows of the cabin, illuminating the dust in the air. Not one car, 3 large SUVs. My mother smiled, a cold, victorious, terrifying smile. You always were too slow, Julian. I was trapped in a wooden box with my mother, completely surrounded by armed men sent by my own father. I thought I had finally hit rock bottom. I was so incredibly wrong. The blinding headlights of the 3 massive SUVs cut through the thick, freezing forest fog like violent searchlights, sweeping aggressively across the dirty glass windows of the isolated cabin. The heavy, rhythmic crunch of gravel outside suddenly stopped, replaced immediately by the terrifying sound of heavy car doors slamming and deep voices shouting tactical orders in the dark. My mother, Margaret, stood perfectly still in the dead center of the dusty room. She did not flinch. She did not gasp. She did not look surprised in the slightest. She simply reached up with her perfectly manicured hands, smoothly adjusted the tailored collar of her expensive cashmere coat, and looked at me with a gaze so utterly devoid of basic human emotion that it made the blood in my veins run completely cold. She had sold me out. My own mother had intentionally driven up here into the remote mountains, sat at this dusty wooden dining table, and played the meticulously crafted role of a grieving, desperate parent just to keep me contained. She was the bait. She stalled me until my father's cartel enforcers arrived to clean up his mess. I did not have the luxury of time to scream at her. I did not have a single second to mentally process the absolute, world-shattering devastation of her maternal betrayal. I grabbed my heavy canvas backpack off the table, the immense physical weight of the forged trust documents pulling hard against my shoulder, and I ran. I didn't head for the front door. I sprinted toward the back of the cabin, kicking open the flimsy wooden screen door just as the heavy iron deadbolt on the front entrance began to splinter and crack under the immense force of a battering ram. I plunged headfirst into the freezing, pitch-black woods. The mountain rain was coming down in sideways sheets, blinding my vision, soaking completely through my heavy canvas jacket in a matter of seconds. I slipped wildly on wet pine needles and slick, treacherous mud, barely catching my balance against the rough, abrasive bark of the towering pine trees. Behind me, I heard the front door of the cabin completely give way with a deafening crash that echoed through the valley. Heavy, militarized boots thundered across the wooden floorboards. Bright, tactical flashlights began to pierce the dense darkness of the forest, frantic beams of blinding white light cutting through the thick pine trees like laser beams, searching for a target. I ran faster and harder than I had ever run in my entire 28 years of life. My lungs burned as if I was breathing in inhaled shards of broken glass. Every single time I heard a dry branch snap behind me, my heart spiked with pure, unadulterated adrenaline. I knew exactly who these men were. They were not local police officers responding to a noise complaint. They were not private security guards hired to intimidate me. They were Victor Thorne's people. The ruthless private equity billionaires and cartel fronts my father owed tens of millions of dollars to did not operate within the standard bounds of the legal system. If they caught me holding the physical evidence of their massive money laundering operation, they would execute me, bury me in a shallow, unmarked grave right here in the sprawling mountains, and Richard Crawford would happily sign my fabricated death certificate to keep his wealth intact. I scrambled desperately down a steep, muddy embankment, sliding on my back, scraping my hands completely raw on the sharp, jagged rocks hidden in the soil. I hit the bottom of the deep ravine hard, splashing violently into a shallow, freezing creek. I pushed myself up, gasping for air, desperately trying to orient my sense of direction in the pitch black. Suddenly, a heavy, gloved hand clamped down hard over my mouth. I panicked instantly. I threw a vicious elbow backward, connecting solidly with dense bone, reaching frantically for the hunting knife secured on my belt. But before I could draw the steel blade, a harsh, incredibly familiar whisper hissed directly into my ear. "Julian, stop fighting. Stop. It is me." The hand dropped from my face. I spun around, my chest heaving, my fists raised. Standing there in the freezing rain, soaking wet, shivering violently, and leaning heavily against the trunk of a massive oak tree, was my brother, Preston. He looked absolutely terrible. He was wearing pale green hospital scrubs that were now completely covered in dark mud, grime, and fresh blood. The thick white bandages wrapped securely around his head were soaked through. His face was a swollen, bruised, unrecognizable mess. He was clutching his side, clearly in excruciating physical agony. "Preston," I gasped, completely bewildered, dropping my defensive stance. What the hell are you doing out here? You were in the intensive care unit. You have a fractured femur and broken ribs. I signed myself out against medical advice the exact second you left the ward. Preston choked out, grimacing as he shifted his weight. I stole an attending doctor's keys from the nurse's station, took his sedan from the parking garage, and drove up the back service road without turning the headlights on. I knew you would come to Grandpa's cabin. It is the only piece of real estate in the family portfolio that is totally off the grid. They are right behind me, Preston, I warned urgently, looking up the steep, muddy embankment. The tactical flashlight beams were getting much closer, sweeping aggressively across the upper canopy. Dad sent Thorne's people to finish the job. Mom was waiting inside the cabin. She set me up. She stalled me. Preston's bruised, swollen face hardened. A look of absolute, profound disgust crossed his features. I know she did. Dad called her on her cell phone while I was pretending to be asleep in the hospital bed. I heard the entire sick plan. They are going to frame you for the massive embezzlement, kill you out here, and claim you committed suicide out of overwhelming guilt to close the federal investigation. I gripped the wet straps of my backpack, shaking my head. I have the physical documents. I went to the Denver archive basement. Wallace helped me. I have the autopen forgery evidence. I have the offshore account numbers. Physical documents are absolutely not enough, Julian, Preston said urgently, reaching carefully into the pocket of his wet, muddy scrubs. Dad is a master manipulator. He has corrupt judges, powerful politicians, and high-priced defense lawyers in his pocket. He will easily claim you forged those papers yourself to orchestrate a hostile takeover of the company. You need the digital footprint. You need the encrypted server logs. Preston pulled out a small, heavy metallic object. A high-capacity, military-grade encrypted USB drive. He shoved it forcefully into my cold hand. What is this? I asked, staring down at the small drive resting in my palm. It is absolutely everything, Preston breathed heavily, his legs visibly shaking from the agonizing pain of his shattered leg. After Grandpa warned me at the barbecue, after he told me the trust fund and my college fund were complete lies, I used my executive access clearance to dive deep into Dad's private, partitioned servers. I didn't know exactly what I was looking for at first, but I found the hidden ledgers. I bypassed his security and downloaded the entire raw data file. Every single wire transfer, every offshore account balance, every single text message and email communication between Dad and Victor Thorne. It proves beyond a shadow of a doubt that he routed federal defense funds through your social security number, and it proves he used my salary and promotion as a front to wash the clean money. I looked at the golden child, the brother who had relentlessly tormented me, violently belittled me, and stolen all the oxygen in every room for 28 years. He had risked his own life, dragged his broken, bleeding body up a freezing mountain, just to give me the ultimate weapon I needed to destroy our father. Why are you doing this, Preston? I asked quietly, the rain washing the mud from his face. Preston looked at me, the lifelong arrogance completely stripped away, leaving only a broken, terrified, but remarkably clear-headed man. Because for my entire life, I truly thought I was better than you. I thought Dad loved me because I was genuinely special. But I wasn't special, Julian. I was just compliant. I was his obedient pet. He groomed me to be his corporate cheerleader, and he groomed you to be his legal meat shield. Grandpa was the only person in our entire bloodline who actually loved us enough to try and stop it. We owe it to him to burn Richard Crawford to the ground. Harsh voices echoed loudly down the ravine. The armed men were getting dangerously close. You need to go right now, Preston said, pulling a bright orange emergency flare gun from his jacket pocket. I parked the stolen sedan about a mile east down the unpaved fire road. The keys are in the ignition. Take the drive. Find Vivian Hayes. Who is Vivian Hayes? I asked frantically, clutching the drive. She is an independent investigative journalist for the Denver Chronicle. She exposed a massive real estate cartel 5 years ago. Grandpa trusted her deeply. Her encrypted phone number is etched on the back of the USB casing. Go to her. I am going to draw them away from you. Preston, no, they will kill you. I grabbed his arm, pulling him back. Preston offered a grim, bloody, defiant smile. No, they will not. I am the golden child, remember? Dad needs me alive to legally inherit the remaining clean assets. They have strict orders not to harm me. Now run, Julian. Run. Preston turned away from me and fired the flare gun straight up through the dense forest canopy. A blinding, intense red light exploded above the trees, casting a violent crimson glow over the entire forest. The men at the top of the ridge shouted loudly and immediately began scrambling toward his highly visible position, completely ignoring the dark creek bed where I stood. I did not hesitate. I turned and sprinted east through the freezing mud, clutching the metallic USB drive in my hand like it was my only lifeline. I found the stolen sedan exactly where Preston said it would be, hidden behind a thick grove of trees. I jumped into the driver's seat, cranked the engine, and tore off down the treacherous mountain road, leaving my broken family and my painful past in the rearview mirror. By the time I finally reached the Denver city limits, the sun was just beginning to rise, casting a dull, dreary gray light over the towering skyline. I pulled into the empty parking lot of a 24-hour diner. I walked inside, ordered a black coffee, sat in the furthest, darkest booth in the back, and used a prepaid burner phone I bought at a gas station to dial the number written on the USB. She answered on the second ring. Vivian Hayes speaking. My name is Julian Crawford, I said, keeping my voice incredibly low and steady. Harrison Crawford was my grandfather. He left me something highly sensitive. My brother extracted the server data. I need your professional help to decrypt it before my father finds me. There was a long, heavy pause on the other end of the line. Then, a sharp, ragged exhale. I have been waiting for this exact phone call for 5 long years. Meet me at the independent coffee shop on 12th and Grant near Union Station. Bring absolutely everything you have. Make sure you are not followed, Julian. They own the local traffic cameras. When I walked into the busy coffee shop an hour later, I spotted her immediately. Vivian was a sharp-looking, intense woman in her late 40s, wearing a classic tan trench coat and thick-rimmed glasses, typing rapidly on a secure, heavily encrypted laptop. She looked up, assessing me instantly with the trained eyes of an investigative reporter. She saw the dried mud on my clothes, the profound exhaustion in my eyes, and the heavy canvas backpack slung securely over my shoulder. I sat down in the booth directly across from her and slid the metallic USB drive across the scratched wooden table. My brother pulled this raw data from the executive servers before my father could wipe them clean, I explained quickly. It has the routing numbers for the offshore accounts. It proves my father used my identity, without my consent, to launder federal money for Victor Thorne. Vivian did not waste time with polite pleasantries. She plugged the drive into her secure laptop and immediately began running a complex decryption sequence. Lines of green code scrolled rapidly across her dark screen. Her eyes widened significantly behind her glasses. Julian, she whispered, her professional, stoic composure cracking slightly. This is not just standard corporate embezzlement or tax evasion. These are massive federal defense subcontracts. Your father was actively filtering taxpayer money meant for critical military infrastructure through empty shell companies and depositing it directly into accounts controlled by the Thorne Syndicate. If this information gets out, it will not just take down your father. It will trigger a massive federal RICO investigation. It will take down politicians, major bankers, and half the local government. I have the physical documents too, I said, pulling a massive stack of folders from my backpack and placing them on the table. The AutoPen forgeries. They prove I never signed off on a single financial transaction. Vivian began rapidly scanning the documents into her laptop using a portable scanner. This is an absolute kill shot, Julian. With this undeniable data, I can bypass the corrupt local police department entirely and send the encrypted package directly to a highly trusted contact I have at the FBI field office in Washington, D.C. Once I hit send, it goes directly to the federal grand jury. There is absolutely no stopping it. Then do it, I said without a single ounce of hesitation. Send it all. But before her finger could press the enter key, a new, hidden file popped up on her screen. It was buried deep within the nested folders. A video file, simply titled with my grandfather's initials, HC. Vivian clicked play. The video image was slightly grainy, clearly recorded on a low-quality laptop webcam. But the face was unmistakable. It was Grandpa Harrison, sitting in his worn leather armchair in his study. The exact same chair where I had found his lifeless body. He looked incredibly exhausted, pale, but his voice was completely clear, resolute, and steady. "Julian." My grandfather's voice echoed softly from the laptop speakers. "If you are watching this, it means Richard has finally gone too far, and I am no longer here to protect you. I want you to know that the trust fund was originally real. When you were born, I saw how your father looked at you. I saw the deep resentment. I wanted to protect your future, so I legally put the controlling shares in your name. But your father found out. He hijacked the legal structure. He used your good name as a shield for his insatiable greed." Hot tears pricked the corners of my eyes. He really did try to protect me. "But I have meticulously gathered the evidence," Grandpa Harrison continued on the video, holding up a ledger. "I am going to the federal authorities tomorrow morning. But I need to leave this permanent record in case I do not make it. Richard is not working alone. The man financing the operation, the man who threatened to brutally murder our entire family if I expose this fraud, is Victor Thorne. If anything happens to me, I want the world to know it was Thorne who ordered it, and Richard who allowed it to happen." The video cut abruptly to black. I sat back in the booth, the air completely knocked out of my lungs. My father didn't just cover up the murder. He actively sanctioned it. He let Victor Thorne murder his own father to protect his massive wealth and his fragile ego. Suddenly, the cheerful bell above the coffee shop door chimed loudly. Two massive, heavily muscled men in expensive dark suits walked in. They did not look at the menu board. They did not look at the nervous barista. Their cold, dead eyes scanned the crowded room, locking directly onto me and Vivian. "They tracked your cell phone signal," Vivian hissed, immediately slamming her laptop shut and shoving it aggressively into her leather messenger bag. "We need to go. Right now." We bolted violently out the back exit of the coffee shop, bursting into the narrow, trash-filled alleyway just as the two massive men in suits started sprinting toward our table, knocking over chairs and screaming for us to stop. The morning air was cold, sharp, and unforgiving. I grabbed Vivian's arm, and we ran frantically down the alley, dodging rusted dumpsters, broken glass, and wooden delivery pallets. We emerged onto a busy side street, desperately trying to blend into the early morning commuter traffic, keeping our heads down. "Where is your car?" Vivian asked, completely breathless, gripping the heavy strap of her laptop bag so tight her knuckles were white. "It is parked 3 blocks away," I said, anxiously scanning the crowded street. "But if they tracked my phone signal, they definitely have my license plate flagged in their system. We absolutely cannot use it. It is a death trap. There is an old, decommissioned train depot about a mile from here in the industrial district," Vivian said, pointing toward the towering smokestacks in the distance. "It has massive signal interference from the old electrical grids and thick concrete walls. We can hide there, connect to my secure satellite hotspot, and upload the massive files to the FBI server. But the upload will take at least 5 minutes because of the massive encryption size and the raw data volume." We simply didn't have a choice. We moved quickly and quietly, sticking to the deep shadows of the alleyways, putting as much physical distance between us and the compromised coffee shop as possible. The adrenaline coursing through my veins was masking my profound exhaustion, but my legs felt like they were made of solid lead. The abandoned train depot was a massive, cavernous brick structure, filled with rusted freight cars, broken machinery, and shattered glass skylights that let in thin beams of gray morning light. It smelled heavily of old motor oil, damp concrete, and decay. We slipped carefully through a broken side door and moved deep into the confusing maze of abandoned train cars. We eventually found a small, elevated dispatcher's office overlooking the main floor. It provided excellent cover, a solid steel door, and a clear, unobstructed view of the main entrance. Vivian set her laptop on an old, rusted metal desk and booted it up. She connected her encrypted satellite hotspot and began the upload process to the federal server. A thick green progress bar slowly appeared on the screen. 10%. Once this progress bar hits 100%, it is entirely out of our hands, Vivian said, her intense eyes fixed on the screen, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. The federal warrants will be automatically issued within the hour. No judge in Denver can stop it. I nodded silently, watching the massive main floor below us through the dirty glass window. 20%. Then, the heavy, corrugated metal doors of the depot scraped open with a loud, deafening, screeching groan that echoed endlessly. Bright, blinding headlights from 3 black SUVs flooded the cavernous space, illuminating the thick dust particles dancing in the stale air. Doors slammed aggressively. A dozen highly trained men in tactical gear fanned out across the concrete floor, holding suppressed automatic weapons, moving with military precision. And walking right behind them, wearing a perfectly tailored wool overcoat and Italian leather shoes, was my father, Richard Crawford. He didn't look angry anymore. He looked remarkably calm, professional, like a ruthless CEO stepping into a hostile corporate board meeting that he fully intended to dominate. Julian, Richard's voice echoed loudly and clearly through the empty depot, carrying a deeply disturbing tone of forced, manipulative paternal warmth. I know you are in here, son. Let's not make this harder than it has to be. Come out, and we can handle this quietly, like a family. I looked at Vivian. The green progress bar was agonizingly slow. 40%. We desperately needed time. I stood up, pushing open the steel door of the dispatcher's office, and walked out onto the rusted metal catwalk high above the main floor. I looked down at the man who had systematically ruined my life, the man who had ordered the murder of his own father. We are not a family, Richard, I called out, my voice booming and steady, betraying absolutely none of the terrifying fear I felt inside. We never were. A real family doesn't use their own son as a legal meat shield for a cartel money laundering operation. Richard looked up at me, casually placing his hands in his expensive coat pockets. He signaled calmly for his men to lower their weapons, playing the role of the reasonable, misunderstood father to perfection. You are deeply confused, Julian. You don't understand the immense complexities of high-level corporate finance. I was protecting you. I put the assets in your name to creatively shield you from massive inheritance taxes. The documents you stole from the archive. You are grossly misinterpreting them. I am not misinterpreting anything. I shot back, gripping the cold iron railing. I met with Wallace. I saw the autopen forgeries with my own eyes. I saw the offshore routing numbers. I know all about Victor Thorne. At the exact mention of Thorne's name, Richard's calm, collected facade finally cracked violently. A flicker of genuine, unadulterated panic crossed his eyes. He took a rapid step forward, his voice completely dropping the sickening paternal act. Listen to me very carefully, Julian. You are playing with fire you cannot control. You think you are being a righteous hero, but you are going to get us all brutally killed. Victor Thorne is not a man you cross. He is a monster. If you hand over those documents to the federal authorities, he will slaughter your mother. He will slaughter Preston. He will slaughter you. He already slaughtered Grandpa, I said, the boiling rage finally spilling over. And you stood by and let him do it. Richard hesitated, looking down at the dirty concrete floor. When he looked back up, the corporate mask was entirely gone. The monster was finally, fully revealed. Your grandfather was an idealistic, stubborn old fool, Richard snarled, his face twisting in ugly anger. He built a great company, yes, but he didn't know how to survive in the modern, cutthroat world. He was going to expose the entire operation. He was going to bankrupt us all and send me to federal prison for the rest of my life. I had to make a choice, Julian. It was him or the legacy. So you let Thorne poison him. It was the only viable way, Richard yelled, his voice echoing off the brick walls. I did it for the family. Everything I built, the luxury cars, the massive estate, the pristine reputation, the college fund, it was all for us. It was for you. I yelled back, my voice shaking with fury. You groomed Preston to be your mindless clone, and you set me up to take the fall if you ever got caught. You are a coward, Richard. A pathetic, greedy, soulless coward. Behind me, in the office, Vivian whispered urgently, 80%, Julian. Keep him talking. We just need one more minute. Richard gestured aggressively to the armed men surrounding him. I am completely out of patience, Julian. Bring down the backpack and the USB drive right now. If you hand them over, I swear to God I will put you on a private jet to Europe tonight with $5 million in untraceable cash. You can start a completely new life. You never have to see us again. Just give me the drive. I looked down at the heavily armed men raising their weapons, aiming the laser sights directly at my chest on the catwalk. I looked at my father, desperate, sweating, offering me blood money to walk away from the truth. I don't want your dirty money, Richard, I said, my voice completely calm and resolute. I just want my name back. Take him out, Richard barked viciously to his men, pointing directly up at me. Suddenly, a massive gunshot rang out, echoing deafeningly through the train depot. But the shot didn't come from Richard's men. The heavy, reinforced side doors of the depot burst completely open in an explosion of light and sound, and a massive swarm of heavily armored tactical police officers flooded the floor. Their weapons were drawn, blinding tactical flashlights disorienting Richard's thugs. A senior FBI agent walked in right behind the SWAT team, his gold badge clearly displayed on his tactical vest. He looked up at me on the catwalk, giving a sharp, confirming nod. Richard froze in absolute paralyzing shock. He looked frantically at his highly paid men, who were already dropping their expensive weapons and putting their hands on their heads, immediately recognizing they were completely outgunned by federal agents. Julian, what the hell did you do? Richard screamed, his face contorted in sheer, unadulterated terror. He reached into his coat pocket, a desperate, panicked, incredibly stupid movement. A SWAT officer did not hesitate. He fired a single non-lethal rubber bullet from his tactical shotgun. It struck Richard squarely in the right shoulder with devastating force. Richard screamed in agonizing pain, dropping instantly to his knees, clutching his arm as the federal officers swarmed him, forcing him face down onto the dirty concrete floor and violently ratcheting thick plastic zip ties around his wrists. I turned back to the dispatcher's office. Vivian looked up at me from her laptop, a triumphant smile spreading across her face. The screen flashed bright, beautiful green. Upload complete. Data transmitted to FBI Cybercrimes Division. It is done, Vivian breathed, closing the heavy laptop. The federal warrants are automatically generating as we speak. The offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands are officially frozen. The grand jury has the irrefutable evidence. I walked slowly down the rusted metal stairs to the main floor. The federal agents had completely secured the area. The lead FBI agent walked over to me, looking at the heavy canvas backpack I was carrying. We got a highly secure, anonymous data burst from Vivian Hayes confirming your location, the agent said. Good thing we arrived when we did. I assume you have something in that bag that belongs to the federal government. I do, I said, handing over the heavy canvas backpack containing the forged trust documents. Everything you need to definitively prove the signatures were falsified. But the real evidence, the encrypted server logs tying Richard Crawford directly to Victor Thorne's syndicate, was just transmitted directly to your cyber division. Richard was being roughly dragged to his feet by two large, heavily armored officers. His expensive, custom-tailored coat was covered in thick dirt and his own blood. He looked completely defeated, a pathetic, broken shell of the powerful, intimidating CEO he pretended to be. He locked his cold eyes with me as they dragged him past. You ruined absolutely everything, Richard hissed, spitting blood onto the ground at my feet. You destroyed this family. I looked at him, searching my soul, and feeling absolutely nothing. No anger, no sadness, no guilt, just an overwhelming, beautiful sense of profound relief. "No, Richard," I said quietly, making sure he heard every single word before they put him in the back of the armored vehicle. "I just finalized the divorce." 2 years later, the morning air in downtown Denver was incredibly crisp and clear. I stood on the expansive glass balcony of my newly purchased penthouse apartment, holding a hot cup of black coffee, watching the golden sun rise majestically over the jagged peaks of the Rocky Mountains. The bustling city below was slowly waking up, the streets filling with the usual heavy commuter traffic. I took a deep, cleansing breath, the cold mountain air filling my lungs. For the first time in 28 years, I was completely, unequivocally, legally free. The fallout from that chaotic night at the train depot was catastrophic, biblical, and incredibly satisfying to watch unfold on the nightly news. Vivian Hayes's massive investigative article hit the front page of the Denver Chronicle the very next morning, perfectly timed with the massive, coordinated FBI raids on Crawford Holdings and Victor Thorne's heavily guarded private equity firm. The sheer, terrifying scale of the federal embezzlement, the defense contract fraud, and the cartel money laundering sent massive shockwaves through the entire state of Colorado. Richard Crawford did not put up much of a fight in federal court. Faced with the overwhelming, irrefutable digital evidence Preston had bravely pulled from the servers, the undeniable autopen forensic analysis provided by the FBI labs, and Wallace's damning, emotional eyewitness testimony regarding the forgery, Richard's high-priced defense attorneys immediately advised him to take a brutal plea deal to avoid the death penalty for his direct involvement in my grandfather's murder. He is currently serving multiple consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole in a maximum security federal penitentiary in Florence, Colorado. He is completely stripped of his expensive Italian suits, his corner office, and his fake, bought prestige. He is exactly where a monster like him belongs, in a cold concrete box completely irrelevant to the outside world. Victor Thorne was also heavily indicted on massive federal RICO charges. The untouchable billionaire who thought he could buy human lives and manipulate the justice system was dragged out of his sprawling mansion in heavy handcuffs on live national television. My mother, Margaret, managed to barely avoid severe criminal charges by flawlessly playing the role of the terrified, abused, oblivious wife who knew absolutely nothing about the financial specifics. But the court of public opinion and the brutal reality of federal asset forfeiture was not nearly as forgiving. The government systematically seized the massive estate, the luxury cars, the offshore bank accounts, and every single asset tied to the laundered money. Margaret was swiftly and brutally cast out of her high society country clubs and prestigious charity boards. She now lives in a tiny, depressing one-bedroom apartment in a rundown suburb, entirely dependent on a meager social security check. She tried to call me once, about a year ago, leaving a tearful, highly manipulative voicemail begging for financial assistance and claiming she always loved me. I deleted it without listening to the end. I changed my phone number the very next day. Boundaries are only effective if you ruthlessly and consistently enforce them. As for Preston, the former golden child experienced the most dramatic, painful transformation. The severe car accident left him with a permanent, noticeable limp, a daily physical reminder of the night our own father tried to have him killed to protect a lie. Stripped entirely of his multimillion-dollar trust fund, his Porsche, and his unearned, inflated corporate title, Preston was forced to face the harsh reality of the real world for the very first time in his life. He spent 6 grueling months in intensive physical and psychological therapy, slowly detoxing from a lifetime of our father's toxic grooming and emotional manipulation. He didn't go back into corporate real estate. Last I heard from a mutual acquaintance, he was working as a mid-level project manager for a legitimate, small-scale construction company in rural Oregon. He earns an honest, modest salary. He drives a reliable, used Toyota sedan. We do not speak on the phone, and we do not spend holidays together. The emotional damage between us is too deep, the history far too painful to simply erase with an apology. But once a month, like clockwork, I receive a short, polite email from him. It usually just asks how my business is doing, or shares a brief update about his ongoing physical therapy. I reply with brief, polite updates of my own. It is not exactly a warm brotherly bond, but it is a solid baseline of mutual respect. He saved my life that night in the freezing woods. I gave him the chance to finally break free and become his own man. We are even. I did not take a single dime from the remnants of the Crawford empire. I hired a team of lawyers and legally, completely dissolved the fraudulent trust, handing the remaining clean assets over to the federal government for victim restitution. I wanted absolutely nothing to do with Richard's blood money. Instead, I focused all my energy on what I had built with my own two hands. Clara, my incredibly loyal friend and fellow real estate agent who stood by me during the insane media circus, partnered with me to expand my small residential portfolio. Without the suffocating psychological weight of my toxic family dragging me down, my business flourished beyond my wildest dreams. I didn't need to buy a yacht or a sprawling mansion to prove my worth. I drive a reliable truck, I wear comfortable clothes, and I treat my employees and tenants with the dignity and respect my father never showed anyone. Yesterday afternoon, I received a small, certified package in the mail. It was forwarded by the estate lawyer who handled Grandpa Harrison's final affairs and his small, private funeral. It had been delayed in probate court for 2 years due to the extensive criminal investigations. I sat at my kitchen island and carefully opened the padded envelope. Inside was a heavy, beautiful silver pocket watch that I instantly recognized. It was the exact watch Grandpa Harrison always kept on his massive oak desk. And tucked carefully beneath it was a handwritten letter, dated a week before he was murdered. I unfolded the thick, cream-colored paper, recognizing his elegant, shaky cursive handwriting. My dearest Julian, if you are reading this, it means the terrible storm has finally passed, and you have survived. I am writing this letter because there is something I never said to you out loud, and it is my greatest regret in this life. I watched you grow up in the cold shadows of that toxic house. I watched your father completely ignore you, and I watched your mother emotionally neglect you. I saw how deeply it hurt you, but I also saw something they were entirely too blind, too selfish to see. I saw your absolute, unbreakable resilience. I saw you work grueling night shifts to pay for your own education instead of begging them for money. I saw you build your own life from the ground up, refusing to ever compromise your integrity. Richard and Preston always thought wealth was something you inherited, something you flaunted. You understood that true wealth is the character you build when absolutely no one is watching. I left the trust in your name not just to protect you, but because you were the only Crawford man I completely trusted to do the right thing when the horrifying truth finally came out. And I know, in my heart, that you did exactly what needed to be done. Do not let their darkness define your future. You are a profoundly good man, Julian. Build a life you are proud of. I am so incredibly proud to call you my grandson. With all my love, Grandpa Harrison. I sat in my quiet, peaceful apartment, holding the letter tightly to my chest, and for the first time in 28 years, I let myself truly cry. I wept for the grandfather I lost, for the innocent childhood I was robbed of, and for the immense, crushing weight that had finally been lifted from my shoulders forever. The invisible sun was finally seen. I wiped the tears from my face, carefully folded the precious letter, and placed it safely inside the velvet box next to the silver pocket watch. I walked back out onto my balcony, feeling the comforting warmth of the morning sun on my face. People often ask me, usually in hushed, gossipy tones at networking events, how I can possibly live with myself after sending my own flesh and blood to federal prison. They ask how I can sleep soundly at night knowing my mother is living in near poverty while I run a highly successful, growing business. Society has this deeply ingrained, almost pathological obsession with the concept of blood loyalty. We are taught from a very young age that family is absolute, that you must forgive, forget, and endure any amount of psychological abuse simply because you share the same DNA. I am here to tell you, looking directly into this camera, that blood loyalty is the greatest, most destructive lie ever sold to victims of abuse. Sharing DNA with someone does not give them a free pass to systematically destroy your mental health, sabotage your future, or use you as a disposable pawn in their own sick, twisted games. Respect is earned, not genetically inherited. My father did not act like a father. He acted like a parasite. My mother did not act like a mother. She acted like a willing accomplice to my destruction. The day I handed that heavy backpack full of forged documents to the FBI, I did not betray my family. My family betrayed me the day they decided my life, my freedom, and my future were entirely expendable for the sake of their luxury cars, their country club memberships, and their fragile egos. I simply stopped protecting their lies. I chose myself. I chose the truth. Healing from that level of profound, structural betrayal is not a simple, linear process. It does not happen overnight just because the bad guys are locked behind steel bars. There are still days when I wake up with a tight chest, my heart racing, fully expecting to see a black SUV parked ominously across the street. There are still moments when I hear a voice in a restaurant that sounds like Richard's, and my adrenaline spikes, preparing for a fight. Trauma leaves a deep scar, and that scar absolutely aches when it rains. But I have finally learned how to rebuild the foundation of my life. I went to therapy and I did the hard work. I learned how to identify the toxic behaviors I was conditioned to accept as normal. I learned that establishing ironclad boundaries is not an act of cruelty. It is the ultimate act of self-preservation. If someone brings chaos, manipulation, or disrespect into my life, they are removed. Immediately, there are absolutely no negotiations. There are no second chances. I realized that true power is not having a corner office, a hidden offshore bank account, or a guaranteed, unearned position in a corrupt corporate empire. True power is the ability to walk away from a toxic table and build your own. True power is looking in the mirror every single morning and knowing that every single thing you have, you earned with clean hands and a clear conscience. I am sharing my story today not for revenge, and certainly not for pity. Richard and Margaret are already serving their sentences, both legally and socially. I am sharing this for anyone out there who is currently sitting at the end of a long dining room table, feeling utterly invisible, unloved, and entirely inadequate. I am speaking directly to you, the black sheep, the scapegoat, the one who works twice as hard just to be completely ignored. You are not the problem. Their inability to see your worth does not decrease your value one bit. You are not responsible for carrying the generational trauma, the catastrophic financial mistakes, or the toxic, suffocating secrets of your parents. You are allowed to walk away. You are allowed to pack your bags, change your number, block their calls, and build a life that is entirely your own. You do not owe them your sanity. Look at what happens when you finally stop fighting for a seat at a table that was explicitly built to break you. You discover that you have the immense strength to build your own house. Let's pause for a moment. Thank you for staying with me this far. You're truly amazing. Please help me by liking the video and commenting the number 1 below so I know you've been here with me until this point. This not only helps more people discover this story, but also lets me know that my experiences mean something to someone. Your support is the greatest motivation for me to keep sharing. Have you ever faced something similar with your own family? Have you ever had to cut ties with the people who were supposed to protect you? Share your story in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss the next journey. Remember, your peace is worth more than their approval. Stay strong, and I will see you in the next video.